Whoever loved that loved not at first sight, wrote the poet Christopher Marlowe in the 16th century. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we have this snippet of lyrical beauty from Homer Simpson. I'm going to the backseat of my car with the woman I love, and I won't be back for 10 minutes. We have different kinds of lovers. Those we might marry and stay with until a ripe old age, and those we only know for one steamy night in the back of a car. Today, we're going to talk about short loves as well as the people we date for some time, and those we pledge an oath to. Some of us have played the field, some not, and others just stayed with one person their entire lives. Welcome to this episode of the Infographics Show. How many lovers will you have in your life? Okay, so can we call a one-night stand a lover? Well, if you made love, perhaps we can call it that. So let's have a look at how many different people the average person might sleep with in their life. Of course, country to country, this might vary a lot, but we'll see what statistics are out there. There have been lots of surveys over the years, and we'll start with a recent Superdrug survey that interviewed 2,000 people from the US and Europe. The survey gave details about each country, and also the global average combining all the participants. The global average for women was 7 lovers in a lifetime, and the average for men was 6.7, almost equal. Some of you might now be thinking, I slept with that many people in high school and kept a healthy rate going into my 30s or 40s. But remember, a lot of people aren't so promiscuous and may have long-term relationships. In this study, the Brits had the most partners in Europe at 7, and Italy had the least at 5.4. The US average was 7.2, with people from Utah sleeping with the least number of people at an average of 2.6, and people from Louisiana being the most promiscuous with an average of 15.4. But no two surveys are alike. Durex has done quite a lot of studies on this subject. In one such survey, it said that people from Turkey had the highest number of sexual partners in a lifetime, at 15.4. The global average, by the way, was 9 partners. In second, it was Australia with 13.3, then New Zealand 13.2, Iceland 13, South Africa 12.5, and Finland 12.4. The United States average in this survey was 10.7, while the UK was 9.8. Down at the lower end of the scale was India, 3, China, 3.1, Vietnam, 3.2, Hong Kong, 3.7. Yet another survey, this time by the Journal of Sex Research, said from the 15,000 people they interviewed across the globe, men had an average of 14.1 partners and women 7. As we said, there are many surveys, but it looks like a high number for a country would be no more than 15 and a low of 3. How many one-night stands will you have in your life going by these numbers? Well, you'll likely fall somewhere in the middle. Of course, some of you might rut like rabbits your whole life, while others might marry their high school sweetheart and never sleep with another person. The problem we have now is that these surveys don't differentiate from one-night stands, people who pay for their carnal thrills, and people who have long-term lovers. We can't call paying someone for this act an act of love or having a lover. But just so you know, one survey by World Atlas told us that the countries that spend the most on that are in order: Spain, Switzerland, South Korea, Germany, and Japan. Another survey by researchers told us that 80% of Cambodian men had paid for it at least once in their life, while 75% of Thai men had, 45% of Italian men had, 39% of Spanish men had, and 37% of Japanese men had. The US was 20% and the UK was 8.8%. We saw that China was very low on the number of sexual partners in a lifetime, but there are scores of articles out there telling us about China's problem of men buying their short-time trysts. By 2020, we're told 17% of all Chinese men aged 18 to 61 will have done this at least once. The South China Morning Post wrote in 2017 that this boom was due to the economic boom, wherein some men are left behind and can't find partners, and some women left out make cash when they can. So with this in mind, we might wonder how reliable those stats are when asking how many partners one has had in their life. Well, it's known that in Cambodia and Thailand, visiting an establishment where women of the night work is not exactly that unusual. We believe that when people talked about how many physical partners they had in their lifetime, they were talking about serious partners or even perhaps one-night stands that didn't involve the exchange of money. As we said, even though these on-the-clock engagements are not lover with lover, we have to point out that they might profoundly change the numbers regarding how many people someone might have slept with. It seems not much research has been done into how many boyfriends or girlfriends we'll have in a lifetime. This question was asked on Quora, and we saw replies such as this from a man in the USA who said he had slept with a total of 57 women in his life. He said he counted. He added, "In university I was heroic. I had 4 relationships that felt serious, 2 of which I thought could lead to marriage, including one that did in fact lead to my marriage. We did, however, find one source that told us that men will have an average of 8 serious relationships in their lifetime, while women will have an average of 7. For men, 4 of those will last less than a year, 2 will last over a year, and the rest will be very short. Women will have 3 relationships that last short of a year, 2 that will last more than a year, and the rest not long at all. The research was part of a book called The Rosie Project. Looking at Reddit and Quora, these numbers don't seem that far off. It's likely that an average person in a lifetime might just have had a handful of serious partners, some a few more, some a few less. We might also take into account that some people start very late or don't start at all. The CDC tells us that in the USA, 12.3% of women and 14.3% of men aged 20 to 24 are virgins. From the age of 25 to 29, it's only 5% for both men and women, and only 0.3% for both when they reach 40 to 44. Psychology Today tells us pretty much the same in terms of figures, and says there are very few virgins after the age of 40, but also some people have taken a vow of abstinence when it comes to getting it on. Again, the statistics differ depending on where you're looking, but one source tells us that the highest divorce rates are in Luxembourg, 87%, Spain, 65%, France, 55%, Russia, 51%, and the United States, 46%. The lowest rates of divorce are in India, 1%, Chile, 3%, Colombia, 9%, Mexico, 15%, and Kenya, 15%. We might look at other stats that tells us in 2013, 40% of marriages in the US had at least one person in that relationship that had married before. Pew Research tells us that indeed that year, 4 out of every 10 marriages had one person who had been married before, and in 20% of marriages, both people had been married before. Pew also said more people were dating online, but research hasn't shown that this doesn't necessarily mean people are having more lovers. We already did a show on dating in the digital world, so you should check that out. All we can do now is turn this over to you, and maybe we'll glean something that defines statistics we've talked about today. How many lovers have you had? How many one-night stands? How many do you think you'll have? If you're still a young gun, from what you know about the people around you, how many lovers do you think people have had in a lifetime? Both serious relationships, short flops, and just one night. Tell us in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other show, What is Love and Will You Ever Fall in Love? Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.